Welcome, Sister Nancy. It
Thank you.
is so great to have you here.
Thank
This
you.
is this is I'm Sister Marie Paul Curley of the Daughters of St. Paul, and I'm the blogger here. Sister Nancy Usselmann from my community, the Daughters of St. Paul, is also the director for the Pauline Center for Media Studies. And I really wanted to invite her. We were going to do this whole handwritten back and forth interview, but then I was like, "You're in town. Let's just do a video
Yeah.
and post it up about your new book, which it's a wonderful book. It's called A
Thank you.
Sacred Look, Becoming Cultural Mystics, and it's available on our Pauline Books and Media web store. It's available on Amazon. It's available, of course, if you go into any of our Pauline Book and Media centers around the U.S. or Canada. You can pick up a copy, and I highly recommend it. But first, I just wanted to ask Sister Nancy, we're good friends. We have known each other for a long time as Daughters of St. Paul, studied a bit together, and we are both passionate about connecting, bringing together the gospel and the media in today's pop culture. But I wanted to ask her to introduce herself and the work that she does at Pauline Center for Media Studies, and then kind of, okay, so what got you to write this book?
Well, from the Pauline Center for Media Studies in Los Angeles, I work a lot in the area of media literacy education, and I teach media mindfulness to youth, young adults, catechists, teachers, ministers, anybody who's really interested in connecting faith and their media experience. And so I've always kind of wondered about that. Like, I've been teaching media literacy education for like 20 years, even before I was actually the director of the media studies. I've done it on the side for many years, but I've always wanted to look for what is that theological foundation for connecting media literacy with our faith formation and our spiritual experience. And I was really looking for a theology of popular culture that really kind of made that connection for me. And I haven't found it, so that's why I kind of wrote this book. It kind of came out of a lot of time of prayer and reflection and consideration of the culture. And I love movies, music, and books, and I always have since I was a kid. So it's kind of like naturally part of me. And I love popular movies and television shows and pop music. I've been known as a pop music junkie. So I even though I like jazz and blues, I like pop music a lot. So I listen to a lot of different things. But I think part of it is me reflecting from my own spiritual experience upon what the culture is really yearning for. What are the deep existential human desires that are communicated in a lot of our popular media? The need for communion, connection, intimacy, love, a profound sense of search for meaning and purpose in our lives. And we see that played out a lot in the popular media culture. I mean, watch some films and you will see some of these deep questions coming out that all of us have. And ultimately, I like it how the Jesuit theologian Karl Rahner will say, he calls it a supernatural existential that's in every human person. And what that means is we all are born with that desire for the something more, the desire for what is beyond that this world cannot satisfy. And ultimately, as Christians, as Catholics, we know it in that ultimate desire is for God. And God alone can truly fulfill every desire that's within us. But I think the starting point in the culture, it's there. And we can draw it out and we can talk about it and communicate and really then propose to the culture. This is the evangelization part. Propose to the culture the one who truly fulfills us, and that's Jesus Christ.
Exactly. Yeah, and you put that so well. But really, to kind of tap into humanity's deepest longing, expressed sometimes in today's culture so beautifully, so artistically, so compellingly.
Oh, yes.
You know, we've got some great artists alive today in terms of film and music and visual art, and we've got all of that happening. And, you know, whether they're aware of it or not, they're speaking out of the depths of their souls. And every human person is created in the image and likeness of God. So when we speak from our depths, we are speaking really as images of God.
Exactly.
And so it's just amazing to be able to draw that out and then to respond. And I'm going to, you know what? I had a point that I was going to bring up at the end, but I want to jump right into it
Okay,
because
sure.
we have Catholic creatives I know who occasionally read this blog. And we're actually going to be doing a little bit of an online look at letter to artists, kind of
Okay.
delving in
Oh,
deeper
love that.
to that. But I wanted to talk at least a little bit about this whole idea of sacramentality. And okay, so in the book, actually, I should throw up a picture of the cover because I was planning to do that and I didn't get to it. But in the book, A Sacred Look, Becoming Cultural Mystics, in one of my favorite chapters is entitled Expressing the Mystery, Sacramental Imagination in Film. And I just want to read a couple of lines from this. So we're talking about sacramentality, which is the use of symbols and signs to convey deeper realities. But I love how you describe how artists use this idea of signs and symbols. Artists often think symbolically and have a peculiar sacramental awareness that many people do not possess. Artists tend to reach toward mystery, the unexplainable and the existential. They extend toward feeling sensitivity, reflective cognition that enters into the mystery while reflecting on human experience. John Shea explains, sacramental consciousness does not desert the concrete historical world, but turns it into a symbol. Poets do this with language. And then you go on to quote, God's Grandeur by Gerard Manley Hopkins. And I just think that this quote talks about how artists not only, well, I think everybody has a lens or a way to go deeper, but I think artists really focus on expressing that. And what a gift that is for those of us who are engaged in the arts or engaged in appreciating the arts, to be able to recognize an expression of God through something very human. What do you want to?
Well, the human,
add to
I think,
that?
that's the point of the visual arts of film and the art of film and television and music. It reaches down deep in the soul and expresses feelings and emotions that usually words do not suffice. And I think that's what it brings out of. That's why people go to film. Sometimes it helps them articulate sometimes the struggles that they're going through, the difficulties in life, or even just to draw out those deep questions of like, yeah, I need other people in my life. I need love. I need, and yet in all different experiences, not necessarily going to give me everything I need. Because what we were yearned for the most is beyond us, is in the supernatural. But film has a way to help us reflect on it, especially film and television, music. Music speaks down deep that to a part of our souls that nothing else can. Even just a sound, not even lyrics all the time, but even just the sound can draw out an emotion and really beautifully help us to reflect upon those deeper transcendental aspects of our life, really, and to yearn for the true, good, and beautiful, which is ultimately God.
Yes, yeah. No, I just love the fact that we can be pop culture mystics. Okay, so short definition.
Short.
Is that impossible? What is a pop culture mystic and how can we become pop culture mystics?
Pop culture mystic is someone who can recognize and look deep into how God's grace is at work in the world, how God's grace is at work, even in the artifacts of pop culture, really through that deep human yearnings and desires. And it comes and it ferments all those artistic questionings really ferment within popular culture. And that's our opportunity. Pop culture mystic brings a deep, profound faith and relationship with God to their experience of the pop culture, so as to draw out of it, those yearnings and those hungers of humanity to be able to propose really the message of the gospel, which is this is where our fulfillment lies. So a pop culture mystic is someone who looks at the world with love, and yet not negating the evil that's there, not negating sometimes the horror that's presented to us through the media, but also to be able to struggle with the sin, the darkness, the difficulties of life. I mean, there's the light and darkness in every human person, and we all have to struggle with it. Sometimes film helps, project that onto a big screen for us to be able to see it for what it is, and sometimes to see sin for what it is, and yet to see the grace that redemption offers. The grace of forgiveness and of transformation.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, that's a great, you did that so well. And in
I'm-
just a couple minutes. That was awesome. That was
Well, that
awesome.
wasn't very short, but you can read the book if you want to know a little bit more about it.
It is really a great read. I definitely had my favorite chapters. Sister Nancy and I both love film. And that's kind of really my first love. Second love. I love books too. But for you, I mean, I think what I found most impressive and could learn the most from the book was really looking at music, because that's something I'm not as familiar with, pop music, but you are. And just some of the examples you raised, I was like, oh, I got to go listen to that song now. And it was really, really helpful to go through it. Now, I want to ask you, if you could you give us like one example of one song or film or television show, or even a picture, just one example of how you would approach a media artifact, from this perspective of being a pop culture mystic? Just
I don't know.
Make it concrete.
Sure. Well,
Yeah.
I'm going to bring one of the last Oscar, winning movies, and that was Three Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri. Okay, it's a really tough film. It's really, it's rough. It's gruff. It's got a lot of angst going on in it. And some people are turned off by the language, by the violence, and yet it is a very profound film. And if you caught it, if you watched the film, and within the first 5 minutes of the film, guess what? The advertising agent who sells the billboards to Mildred, if you've seen the film, what's he reading? He's reading a book by Flannery O'Connor called A Good Man is Hard to Find. Flannery O'Connor, a Catholic novelist, a Catholic writer, who really struggles with the sin, the muckiness of life and of our own souls, and be able to present the grace of transformation and the grace of redemption. And in that film, if you can look at it from a Flannery O'Connor perspective, the sacramentality, the symbols that are used, look deeper at it, you will see a really transformative film. It's very profound, yet it's a struggle. Because at first glance, I was like, okay, I got to think about this movie. And then I looked deeper. Wow, it is transforming.
I agree. Seeing that film through a Flannery O'Connor lens really makes that film work. I mean, it became one of my favorite films of last year.
And it's a brilliantly crafted film.
It's brilliant. It's brilliantly written too. It's an amazing screenplay. So when you talked about sacramentality, what are we talking about when we're looking at the Catholic imagination or the sacramentality in media? Like what could you just, for those who might not be familiar with the concept, could you just kind of explain it a little bit?
Well, when we consider sacraments such as like baptism and Eucharist or reconciliation, whatever, it was in the churches, the Catholic Church's understanding of sacraments, there's a use of the tangible, the concrete material goods and things to be able to communicate God's grace to us. And God's grace is mediated to us through all different things in the world and through people, through the concrete and tangible. And we look in like the symbols of water, of fire, of oil, of gestures. They're simple things, and yet they are the presence of Christ. They are the grace of Christ presented to us and mediated to us. And I think if you take that broader perspective and look at symbols and signs from really a deeper perspective of how God's grace is at work in the world, even in film and television and pop music, you'll see these symbols and signs that are communicate little symbols like, in the film Fences, if you've seen that play with Denzel Washington, there's a symbol of the rose. Well, his wife's name is Rose, but the rose gets pushed against the fence when she gets pushed there, and it falls to the ground. It's almost like he's lost his rose through his infidelity. And the fence itself is all a symbol, and the whole film is shot through the eyes of the fence, and if you look at that symbol of the fence is really a symbol of kind of containment, protection, but it's also a symbol of rigidity, of,
Almost a trap,
a
right?
trap, because
Yeah.
he actually wants to keep everyone else inside the fence, his whole family, and yet he's the one who steps outside of the fence through his infidelity, and and is thinking everyone else needs to stay within it, but he has actually stepped out of it. So it's a really interesting symbol in the whole film. So it gives the whole movie so much more meaning. And that was a stage play, so that was the whole point of the movie, was talking about the fence, how he's building this fence over years. But it really has a deeper and more profound meaning in it.
Yeah, that's a great example. Those are great examples. I don't want to run too
Yeah.
long, so I just want to wrap up with this whole idea of, how, practically speaking, when we're trying to engage with the culture, but also trying to, give attention also to our spiritual lives and have a spirit of silence, as Pope Francis encourages us in his apostolic exhortation, Call to Holiness in Today's World. How do we live that engagement, but also live our call to holiness? I mean, it seems like you're trying to bring those together. How do we do that?
Well, that's what a pop culture mystic is really about. It's the mysticism part of it is that we need to have an experience and relationship with God in order to engage the popular media culture. If we don't have that deep and profound relationship with God, then we can just easily get absorbed into the whole ideologies of the culture and follow it along and receive and just absorb all these messages that come to us. But really, we want to be critically engaged. We want to have our faith as really that catalyst for asking questions of everything we see and experience in the media. We call it media mindfulness, but I really think it requires a deep prayer life. It requires a very spiritual lens to be able to engage the culture as a mystic. And I don't mean we have to have, great spiritual gifts to be able to see that. What I mean is that we need, first and foremost, a deep and profound relationship with God. If we have that, then we can see things in the culture that speak to this deeper meaning and this deeper desires of humanity with whole new eyes, a whole new lens.
Sometimes I think too, it just requires us taking a moment to step back and reflect a little bit on
That's
something.
exactly.
Because if we ask for the light of the Holy Spirit, if we bring our media experiences into prayer, and we bring our prayer into our experiences of the culture,
Yeah.
I think that, you summed it up so perfectly. It's seeing the culture with the eyes of love and entering the culture with the eyes of love. But I think sometimes we just need to stop and take a step back and say, oh, I watched that movie last night. It's still staying. There's a scene that's staying with me. Why?
And what do I take away from it?
Yeah.
What does it do to change me? What does it change my life? How does it affect me?
And how do I want to respond to it?
Yeah,
How do I want
absolutely.
to, if there's something about the message, or that challenges me, maybe I want to respond in a different way. But it's all about that transformation, and I
Yes.
think I really love that about the whole media mindfulness approach.
Yes.
So thank you so much for
Yeah,
being with us,
thank you.
Sister Nancy. I totally recommend reading her book. It's called A Sacred Look: Becoming Cultural Mystics, and it's really, there's some theology in it, but there's also it's packed with practical examples. So if you're interested in looking at the culture with eyes of faith, how to practice media mindfulness in your own life, how to integrate your prayer with, your prayer life, your life of faith, with the media culture that so many of us are so immersed in. We're surrounded by it. This might be a great book for you. So thank you for joining us.
Check it out, at Pauline.org
Pauline.org/store.
store.
or Amazon.
Something.
I'll put a link
Yeah.
in the notes below.
And if you check it out on Amazon, and you read it and you think, oh, this is something interesting in there, I'd appreciate your review on Amazon, because it gives me an idea of what you're thinking about it. And also, it makes it more known in Amazon. They push it up the list, and gets a lot opportunity for more people to know about it and to see it and to properly, hopefully, engage with the culture in a different and unique way.
Yeah, and it's another way of being a pop cultural mystic to
That's right.
actually raise this discussion
Yeah.
into Amazon's, comments pages. I think that's awesome.
Yeah.
That'd be great. God
Thank
bless you,
God bless you.
and we'll be in touch.